Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Then you know what happens? 6 years later, you find yourself singing Surrey with a fringe on top in front of Ira!
You gotta just hit record at some point.
Yep. Cool.
Like, who starts?
Welcome to my kitchen for a pretty normal episode of In Front of Ira. I've been doing this intro.
We should do, I think that's the intro. I think we're just doing the intro. Welcome to In Front of Ira, the podcast where every now and then we record actually in a room together and then forget what our intro is because we don't have it in front of us.
Google Doc. We're two historians and friends and lovers of romantic comedies, and we're in my kitchen. Which is where all good podcasts are made, in people's kitchens. So excuse a slight echo.
Yeah, we kind of
appliances.
Didn't really plan to do it. It was kind of just availability and we just had like some small microphones and we trust that you will find our amazing commentary interesting enough to put up with us.
To our three listeners.
Yeah.
Today we're talking about Say Anything from 1989.
Yeah.
Which is written and directed by Cameron Crowe. It is his debut, actually, his directorial debut. He was obviously previously a screenwriter on things like Fast Times at Richmond High, which became sort of the teen film, like the original teen film of the 80s, because it's from 82. It predates all of John Hughes's work in that genre. And so I think it's kind of funny because those two movies are also the kind of quintessential coming-of-age teen films, and he kind of bookends the 80s with them. And in between is John Hughes doing Breakfast Club and like Pretty in Pink and everything that's actually incredibly sexist and rapey when you watch it again.
I haven't seen them in a while, so I will reserve judgment until I review them.
Oh, there's literal date rape in Pretty in Pink. Or no, in 16 Candles, I'm sorry. But, Say Anything does not do this. Say Anything is set actually at graduation and then sort of the summer break right after high school graduation before everyone goes off to college or whatever else they're planning to do. And it stars Ione, Skye as Diane Court, sort of the valedictorian, I think.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing because she's introduced, first of all, like we don't see her, but John Cusack's friends talk about her and talk about how beautiful she is, which is kind of like a typical teen, but also like she's a brain, she's not going to do with her. Like that's the thing that really struck me, that they start right off with saying, oh, she's too smart for you.
She's a brain trapped in the body of a game show host.
Which is a good line.
And I mean, again, it's interesting because it's like on the way out of all of these sort of teen movies that define that generation, and where it's always sort of the high school sociology of like the brain, the jock, and so on and so forth. So I think that's why, like, we immediately sort of recognize certain tropes, but then the film doesn't actually do them, because I think it's also because it's on the way out of high school and those tropes will no longer serve people once they leave.
It's really interesting because the descriptions, if you look it up on IMDb or any of the streaming services, it basically says Lloyd Dobler is a loser and he's trying to get with this super success. I'm like, that's not really the vibe that I got, because like he doesn't do the typical high school movie loser thing where he just mopes around. He's incredibly active from the first moment on, just trying to get the space.
He's like this kind of like, he's into, I guess the difference is more like he's maybe more what would be like the emo goth kid to a certain degree. Like he listens to, I guess, punk, or he dresses like he listens to punk. So I think it's actually more of a social class thing, which I mean is implied in a lot of the high school stuff too, right? All of the mean girls are usually like upper class, but she's not. I mean, she's upper middle class, and this will also play a role because her father is committing tax fraud, and that becomes a massive sort of B-plot to the whole thing.
Which I don't know, when I last saw this movie, completely did not see that coming. And it really is, it's a fascinating plot point because you really think when they start introducing the dad, I'm like, oh, he's a good dad. He's not the kind of
Yeah.
classic teen movie dad who are like, you should not go out with boys and like
You should not have
controlling.
sex.
Like this whole idea of like say anything is literally, he says like, you can say anything to me, right? You can
Although
share.
he's still, I mean, he's obviously like, she's about to go off to this fellowship in the UK, and he's like, don't let this boy distract you. He's a distraction.
Yeah.
Like, he's trying to be accommodating. He's still kind of like, don't waste your time on boys, essentially. But it's also interesting is like normally in these situations when there's a father, their mom is dead, but the mom is very much alive.
Not really in the picture.
He's not
He's
in
one
the
scene.
picture. Like she has contact with her daughter, but her primary caretaker is this dad that she's like also devoted to, and then finds out her dad is a fraud and can like literally frauded people out of their money. It's not just that he didn't file his taxes properly and there's like an
There's like
offshore
thousands and
it's like an
thousands of
offshore
dollars.
account in the Bahamas or whatever. Like he's not named in the Panama Papers. But like worse, like he cheats people who died out of money. Like apparently, I think like he's a doctor. I think
He runs. I think he's like to me. It seems like he was like an administrator of like a nursing facility.
Okay, something like that.
Like an
so
like
it's
an old
even
people's
worse.
home.
Like he's cheating. Like it's really bad actually, and I mean I think this is important obviously because this is the story of her emancipation, right? Like for both of them, but like, even more for her, of like emancipation from her dad and like standing on her own 2 feet and going to a different like another country by the end. But first she needs to basically emancipate herself from her dad and start to realize her dad is not the perfect man. Lloyd Dobler might be.
Which is actually like the thing that kind of like there's not tons of things that bug me about this movie. There's a thing that kind of bugs me because and again we're jumping all over because this movie I think deserves to be talked about thematically rather than kind of chronologically. When she picks Lloyd and basically says like, you know, I need you and let's go to England together, and then he comforts her in the airplane, and you just kind of think, okay, so clearly like when she was 13, her parents got divorced. She had to pick which one she wanted to live with. She wanted to live with her dad because he made her feel safe. And then he turns out to be not really to her a horrible person, but like not a great guy. Like so and not true to her. Like he lies to her face about whether he committed the tax fraud or not. And then she just picks another guy and this time trusts that he might not be problematic.
Or I feel like we're being sold that Lloyd definitely is the guy you can trust, right? So the idea would be, and I think he actually needs to figure out what to do with his life because his whole thing is, I'm gonna be Diane Court's boyfriend because I'm good at that, and I don't know what I'm gonna do with the rest of that. So, which is also interesting. But other than that, he's actually being sold as this very mature for his age kind of kid, almost like he's the designated driver or the key. Like he collects all this. So they go to a party. He decides to ask her out at graduation. They apparently had like sort of one coffee before. It wasn't even really a date, but he clearly has a crush on her. And he asks her out and convinces her to go out with him. So takes her to this post-graduation Roddy party.
Like the one party that's in all the teen
movies. But he's like, he doesn't get drunk because he wants to drive her home and he needs to collect all the guys' keys and he keeps checking in on her. And he has female friends, which is also something that doesn't really happen, right?
We need to talk about these friends. Yeah. They're so good.
Like, so I needed to look her name up again. Lily Taylor, who was like in so many things in that time and then never really broke out. I mean, she was in 6 Feet Under much later. But like she's so great here. She's also in Mystic Pizza as a very similar kind of character, but she's great. And like, I mean, they're completely sold on Lloyd as this perfect guy, but they're apparently not interested in him or like, I don't know. Like,
which is
they're not
also
dating, which is fun. Like there's like platonic female friends, which is like a massive green flag for a guy. Platonic female friends, everybody.
It's what's really funny about that is because like I saw her and like I'm like, oh, are we gonna see more of her? Because like she steals every scene that she's in. She has this energy about her, which is kind of a little bit like a bit of a kind of like floaty energy, but like at the same time kind of very grounded. Like she wrote 65 songs for her stupid boyfriend, but in the end she basically cuts it off.
Boyfriend, apparently. He's like, well, like keep her tapes because she's clearly gonna be famous. It's like,
I mean, He might not have a heart, but he does have a brain, apparently.
Mm.
She's good. The other friends are not as big characters. They don't really have
And
like
you
character
know who
points.
one of them is, and I didn't recognize her at all. It's Pamela Adlon.
What? No.
Yeah,
Which one?
I think the one we
The
see.
one who
Yeah,
like then says like you never listen to me.
yeah, I think so. That's Pamela Adlon.
Okay. I have to say there are apparently Eric Stoltz is in this
Mhm.
as well. Who I think he's the guy
Maybe
with
one
the
of
beard
the guys
at the
who's
party.
at the party, and then maybe when there's this in the middle of the movie when they've broken up and they're in this junkyard, and Lloyd is like, "So, if you're so into women, tell me, why do you spend your Saturday night sitting in this junkyard with like 3 other guys drinking beer, 4 other guys who count him?" And they're like, "Because of the
Personal choice." Yeah, it's really good. The dad is really played well by John Mahoney, who I think in
We
this
had him on
podcast,
Moonstruck.
yeah,
He's a
last saw in Moonstruck, yeah,
kind of older Lothario character in Moonstruck.
which
who
suited him
wants
well.
to
This
hook up with
suits him well as
Olivia
well.
Dukakis. But yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. And then obviously the amazing stunt casting of like Cameron Crowe clearly going, well, I have John Cusack and I need somebody to play John Cusack's older sister. And as it turns out, Joan Cusack is actually also in a lot of these teen movies at the time. So I think she would have been even an obvious casting choice if you didn't literally also need John Cusack's sister. So we get Joan Cusack as John Cusack's sister.
And they have a really good relationship because clearly the parents are kind of out of the picture. It's implied that they're in the military and that's why they're not there. He says like that they're in Germany, so we're assuming that's like a deployment thing. Why they're both there, if they're just like there for a while and one of them is going to come back, or if they're completely out of the
they've
picture.
been sort of absent parents. Her sister also has a kid already and she can't be that much older. And we get the idea that he sort of lives with them and then helps out with his nephew, I guess. But like she also at some point tells him, like, can you just be his uncle and not like his buddy? And yeah, and he trains kickboxing. And when I first saw all of that, I immediately was like, is this Karate Kid?
No.
And the funny trivia is when they're in the dojo, that's the actual dojo that they used in
Is that why it
Karate
looked
Kid.
like it? I was looking at him like, wow. And I think I wrote down the 80s Karate Kid of it all. Yeah.
It's literally that. And I want to
But he's doing
think that's
kickboxing.
Yeah, I know, but it's still the Karate Kid dojo, the original.
Perfect.
And I mean, I almost feel like Cameron Crowe is making this intentionally at the end of the 80s after all of this. My border is turning itself on us. But it's, I think that's it's just random. It's in there.
Yeah. There's a lot of random interesting things, like the soundtrack is very expansive. Weirdly, I couldn't find it on any of the streaming services as like the collected soundtrack. There's people who made playlists and then added the songs back in. It's also incredibly 80s. It has, my favorite thing is it has Keeping the Dream Alive by Münchner Freiheit.
Yeah, which I completely missed last night, but it was
which is really funny.
And then obviously the scene, and again, we're not being very chronologic here, but like the scene everyone knows from Say Anything without having even seen Say Anything is John Cusack holding up a boombox outside her house and playing In Your Eyes by Peter Gabriel.
The thing about that is, because this is the scene that is quoted a lot, it's quoted in another movie that we're doing on this podcast very soon, the fact that most people know this scene and know basically just the image of that, I thought it would be much more important to the movie than it ended up being.
Yeah.
It was basically just kind of like, this is the moment where she realizes, okay, yeah, maybe, but it's not like, maybe I do want to be with him again, but it's not like a pivotal point where everything is completely lost and this is the last ditch effort.
Grand gesture, and then, but I think that actually makes it more poignant in a way because it's that. So they listen to the song while they're in the car making out and apparently do not sleep together, but it's like still it's sort of where they come close before they break up.
Oh, they don't?
I don't think so. I think that's when she comes back and tells her dad she didn't, and there's no reason why she would lie to her.
She says because her dad asks her if he ever was rough with her or if basically tried anything with her, and she's like, no, I decided not to sleep with him. You respected it, and then I attacked him anyway.
Yeah.
Like, she basically says like, yeah, no, I had all the right thoughts in my head, and then like I ended up being a teenager.
Yeah.
So I think they do
Okay, so
sleep
they do,
together.
yeah. Okay. So yeah, and so he plays that to her again, and I think that's obviously it becomes their song, and that's
Yeah.
the whole thing. Although apparently when they filmed that, they had a different song playing, and then they put that back in later. But
Yeah.
I mean, hey, it's Peter Gabriel, you can't go wrong.
Magic of cinema.
And yeah, I mean, I think so. Lloyd Dobler is just such an interesting character because he's sort of like he doesn't know what to do with his life, but apparently mostly it's dating her, and so he makes
Kind of does
decision.
know. Like the funny thing is, like if this was like gender flipped, and if this was a Jane Austen novel, we'd be like, oh yeah, no, like your job is to be like
Yeah,
her boyfriend, sure. Like
and he's like,
that's
cool, I'm good at this. I'm gonna do this. Also, his determination of like, because they tell him in the beginning like, oh, you're not compatible, and you're just gonna get hurt, and he like says, I want to get hurt. So it's clearly also like this thing of like, I haven't actually lived yet. I've only been in high school, and this is my chance now. And he knows from the get-go she's gonna leave. They have 16 weeks, and then she even makes the decision at some point to break up with him to actually focus on studying. And like, I mean, I think it's also an excuse of more like, this is just gonna hurt even more the more time we spend together. And then instead of using that, like, she makes that decision, and obviously he's heartbroken. And I gave him a heart, and she gave me a pen because she gives him a pen to write to her.
Yeah, after her dad suggests that she do that. Can we talk about the iconic lines? Because we quoted a bunch of them already. There are a few lines that I had kind of half forgotten were associated with this movie. One of them is, I gave her my heart, she gave me a pen, which is absolute classic. The other one is obviously the I don't want to sell anything. I don't want to buy anything. I don't want to process anything as a career. And then he goes in this whole thing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Which I also like. I basically I think the last 20 years, I only really vaguely remembered what this was about, and I did not know that this is essentially the monologue that ends in him saying like, I'm going to do kickboxing because it's the sport of the future, and it just makes it so much funnier. And then there's the line when he is the key master, and one of the drunk guys at the end of the party kind of like comes to him, and he basically just kind of like tells him, you must chill. which is also a line that I've heard quoted and completely just decontextualized.
Yeah, also she calls him basic, and I'm like, isn't this thing? Isn't this why we call people basic? And somebody revived that again?
Because it's 89. I had no idea. I don't think I saw that in any other movie from that era, which, to be fair, I didn't see all of the movies from the era. But I thought the very same thing. Is this why we call people basic? Is like all the people who grew up maybe watching this, and then they kind of like set that up? Because it's like an early 2000s term when that becomes standard.
I mean, honestly, most of slang terms come from Black culture, and then it's sort of swept under the rug. I wouldn't know in this case, but yeah, it's interesting. Like, I did not expect a 1989 movie to have like, because you're basic, and then she also kind of beats herself up because like, I called him basic, and he's obviously not deterred.
Yeah, and like her dad understands what she means, which is the other thing. Like
yeah.
I mean, I guess basic is not a slang term that is not understandable if you don't understand it, if you don't know it.
It's really, really funny.
Yeah, it's very basic.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's the obvious coming of age thing because it is a teen film, but it's also interesting because they literally, it's very clear that Lloyd is going to be the man that sort of replaces her dad in her life, because like to the point where he teaches her how to drive, which in the US, where people teach people how to drive at home for some reason, it's usually the dad doing that.
I mean,
and he even watches
taught
her
by my dad, like
through the window, and like that kind of thing. And yeah, it is actually quite extreme to the point where the dad goes to jail for tax fraud, like, which is definitely, again, the twist nobody sees coming.
Although it's set up so well, because there's that scene in the tax office where she comes in and the tax guy says, no, we have all the proof. Did your dad like buy a lot of things that cost like just under $10,000? And in the very first scene where Lloyd comes to our house and they talk about the jukebox, and the dad says like, yeah, and he's asked how much it costs. I'm like, oh yeah, you just need like $9,000. I'm like, that's under the $10,000 million. completely.
it's like, oh,
I was like, that's a lot of money for a jukebox. Did not think about it further.
and it's like, what is it? Oh, does everything look nice, but not too nice? And that's kind of exactly what their house looks like.
Yeah.
Like they don't live in a mansion, but they live in a pretty big house with like very well appointed,
The color work, and let's talk about I mean, there's so much in this movie. The Laszlo Kovacs photography is really amazing and kind of elevates this little movie, which could be something very different. The color, the way that the production design pays attention to colors is remarkable. And because it's not in your face, there's movies where it's in your face. It's not in your face, but it's very noticeable. And I most noticed it in the scene where the dad tries to buy luggage for his daughter and then his credit card gets declined. And he's in this store and he is wearing a beige suit, buying beige luggage. There's a woman in beige clothing coming to help him. And then when you pull out and when he tries to pay for it, when his credit card gets declined, there's a little flirtation between him and the woman who's selling the luggage. There's another guy standing behind them also wearing beige. It's so interesting how this is all so very much clearly meant to be in this. It's kind of like meant to be very humdrum. Like it feels like when he encounters that woman, you almost think like, oh, is romance in the air for him? Because at this point, we're not 100% sure he is actually a tax fraudist. That's a word. And the fact that it's all beige, you're just kind of like, no, I don't think anything exciting is going to happen here.
Yeah, and then his cards get declined, and then he starts to spiral because it's clear that they, have him. Because when the tax office is after you, that's the first thing they do. They freeze all your assets. And yeah, and also I want to talk more about like Lloyd, because it's like you always wonder, like, is he the perfect man? And I mean, the problem probably is that he doesn't actually have much of a life of his own, but other than that, like he takes care of her very well. He doesn't actually wanna, like, he in that thing of like, oh, he's not gonna turn around and do anything bad. Like, she's also the one that breaks up with him. He's not suddenly freaking out at her because he doesn't want commitment, which is the thing you get now every time you go on a fucking dating app. But it's interesting that also the scene where he takes her home after the party and there's like glass in the parking lot, and I love this. There's just one glass in like this massive parking lot, and he takes her
like kicks it to the side a bit. Yeah. The thing is, I think, and I think this is intentional because we're not supposed to just think he's perfect and they're gonna have a wonderful life, because when that scene in that near that dumpster in that parking lot or whatever that is with the four guys, where he ends up getting really agitated and throwing the bottle, and you just kind of like, oh, he has like a violent streak and he has like a frustrated streak in him, and like this whole thing of I haven't figured my life out might come back to bite him, and he might just become a frustrated kind of guy. And you don't see the kind of obvious signs of all kind of like classic 80s movie toxic masculinity in him, but there's always an uneasiness, I think, surrounding this character, which makes you go at the end of the movie, right? Because the end of the movie, they get on the plane, and he basically calms her down by talking to her, and basically you're waiting for the ding when the no smoking sign goes off, and then like you've cleared the most difficult part of the flight, and it's smooth sailing from there, and it does kind of feel like we're being set up for like, yeah, this is just the beginning though, and there's a very, very long flight ahead of those two.
Yeah, although I mean, I do think we're supposed to think that their future is probably fine because the ding does go off. It goes off, but like when it cuts to black.
For a while. It takes a while.
But it cuts to black, and then we hear the ding, which I always thought was a really fun way to do this, because they're on the plane, they're like, and then we just don't know what's going to happen.
I started watching the scene, and then from the moment that they're waiting for that ding, I'm like, swear to God, Cameron Crowe, if you don't end that movie on a fade to black and the ding, I'm gonna complain about you the same way I complain about Steven Spielberg always ending his movies too late.
Yeah, no,
that's my recourse.
I think the most the most Cameron Crowe thing is definitely sort of the middle part where he's in the junkyard. Like, for some reason, everybody's driving around and then he's in the junkyard. Although the dialogue is pretty great. Like, just that bit.
It's just so... The dialogue throughout is so good. I have so many things I have written down in terms of the good dialogue. When they finally, like, made up, where he asks her, are you here because you need someone or because you need me? And I'm like, ooh, that's poignant. And she's going to have to say, I'm here because of you. And then he says, though, he undercuts it immediately by saying, like, I don't care.
Yeah.
And then she says it. So, like, again, there's a little bit of an uneasiness
Yeah,
here.
because again,
They're not
like,
committed.
he's clearly codependent with her a little bit. So this might bite him in the ass, because again, he will suddenly be in the UK and need to figure it out. Although, I mean, he's definitely sort of entered the lore of, like, maybe he's one of the best love interests in film, because there's, I need to look this up in a second, but I think it was How I Met Your Mother who did the scale of, like, masculinity from Dobler to Dahmer. With Lloyd Dahmer and Jeffrey Dahmer, obviously.
Well, there better be, like, a possibility to be higher than Dobler, because as we've noticed, like, he's not bad, but there are some... I felt a little bit weird about some of the things that he ended up doing.
Yeah, it's How I Met Your Mother episode, the Dobler-Dahmer theory. Devised by Ted Mosby for once, and not Barney. But yeah.
Who is the closest thing you have?
Right, so what they measure with this is, and this is interesting because it's such a trope in romantic comedies, if both people are into each other, then a big romantic gesture works, Dobler. But if one person isn't into the other, the same gesture comes off serial killer crazy, Dahmer.
Yeah.
So, exactly. So if he shows up outside of your house with a boombox after you told him sorry and he had, like, one Tinder date with him, then it's very creepy and stalkery and you're probably gonna call the police. If he's the love of your life, or at least your first love, then this might work, and this clearly works. Even though, again, as you say, it's interesting because she doesn't, like, come to the window and it's like a Romeo and Juliet moment. She actually stays...
It's not How I Met Your Mother, right? Yeah. It's not the, what is it, like...
the blue of the French one.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's interesting. Also, like, because, I mean, we all know John Cusack. He's clearly done other things after, although I feel like he's already playing John Cusack. Like, he has a certain... Like, if you watch Serendipity, which we should still do as, like, one of the Christmas episodes, he's very similar. He's like an older Lloyd Dobler, and, like, a lot of how he behaves in that movie, like, sort of becomes sort of a big romantic through the course of the film, and some of his mannerisms. Also, Jeremy Piven, who is, like, the drunk guy with the keys, he's his best friend in Serendipity as well, and I wonder if there's, like, a connection of, like, casting somebody that he would have starred opposite in the 80s. And yeah, I think that's great. But, like, Ione Skye has not done, like, she was in a few things around then, but, like, there weren't any bigger standout movies.
It's interesting because she and I kind of like, not to kind of criticize her for that, because obviously the movie industry is doing its part there, but I'm trying to think about, like, the movies that were coming out around that time and thinking, oh yeah, we need an Ione Skye type in there, and you kind of don't. I don't think the roles were quite there.
I think the problem is, like, she's in this, and this is 89, and then teen movies go away as well, so there wouldn't have, like, sure, a few things came out, like, the same year, and all of these were filmed in, like, 2 weeks, but, like, the moment was over, which this
clearly
film
filmed in
also
88.
so kind of, like, signals that, right? It is clearly, like, this is one cycle of these movies, and then it stops, and it doesn't really come back until the late 90s that much. And I don't know. I mean, what's really interesting about her, because I'm like, okay, I haven't seen her in that much else. Like, her dad is the singer Donovan.
Oh, the Donovan that's just Donovan, like, not even, like...
Donovan.
Who, like, he kind of, like, becomes more famous after that, right? I don't think he's super famous in the 80s, is he?
Is he? Yeah.
I thought it was more like a 90s. Maybe that's just when I was aware of it.
Yeah, and she was also, so apparently she dated Anthony Kiedis of the Red Hot Chili Peppers when she was only 16. And
on the soundtrack.
He was 21. One of those things. But then she married Adam Horowitz of the Beastie Boys, and she was married to him for a while. I think they have kids together. which is also like there's clearly a lot of music connections, which makes sense if your dad is Donovan, I guess. And because it's like, if you're listening to this now, she just published a memoir called Say Everything, where she does talk about all her romantic entanglements, which of course, yes, she did sleep with John Cusack. She does also sleep with Matthew Perry, who she did a movie with around the time that I guess not that many people saw. But obviously that's been a point that's now come up in her doing book promo since unfortunately he passed away, and she shared like a text message exchange with him that was actually cute and not like about that, but yeah, like interesting, and she's bisexual, which apparently she figured out when she was already married to Adam Horowitz, which was interesting. Now I wonder if there's like a Beastie Boys song about my wife is bi. I don't know. It's like interesting for someone like in terms of not having that much of a movie career, definitely lived a life
Which
within
potentially
the industry.
her kind of being with famous successful men is also kind of like how you don't desperately have to take any role, right?
Yeah, I mean, if your father is Donovan, you probably have enough generational wealth to not have to bother anyway. But so clearly,
it's kind of weird because
maybe at least that way she escaped Weinstein. Because that is often the other reason why some of these women are in like 2 or 3 things, and you wonder now 20, 30 years later why they never had a career. It's usually because Harvey Weinstein sabotaged it, and she would have been exactly around
I am still livid on behalf of Ashley Judd.
Ashley Judd, for instance, yeah, there's been a few. So, but I didn't see that on her wiki, and I'm sure that would have been in her memoir. So apparently, but maybe because of that, she was lucky enough to be able to escape his clutches, because she was already in the industry. Doesn't mean nothing predatory happened to her. Again, a 21-year-old Anthony Kiedis thought it was fine to date her when she was 16. But like, at least in terms of, okay, nobody actively maybe sabotaged her acting career.
I don't know. Yeah. Like, we don't know. Maybe we need to read the book.
It's definitely too interesting now.
I mean, certainly interesting life.
She knows a bunch of people. Yeah. But yeah, it's still interesting. I mean, this was definitely a big movie when it came out, and then it didn't like pan out for her as much. I mean, I get why.
It happens all the time, right?
Or Cusack. What did Cusack do before this? They didn't like have a. Is this like a sort of bigger? Like, I mean, I know he worked, and he has smaller parts.
I want to say he was in things in like the mid 80s, but I'm not
like,
aware.
Like a big starring kind of lead role, because I feel like that's probably the thing that a lot of people, I mean, clearly because of the boombox, still connect to.
Was he in? Oh my god! Like I'm losing words. Was he in Better Off Dead? Was that John? That was John Cusack, right? Yeah.
What one is that?
I don't have my phone right now, so you're gonna have to do it.
Yeah, Better Off Dead. And sure, he's actually in 16 Candles, but he's not the lead in 16 Candles.
Yeah, I thought
he's also in Stand By Me, but he's also not one of the leads, and so that's what I mean. Like, he was acting.
Was he the mean guy in Stand By Me?
And he's acting, so would Say Anything, I think, is probably sort of looking at this. That's his big sort of breakout lead role, where it's like, I'm a leading man kind of thing. Doesn't mean he's actually like doing that much. It's really funny because there's a few, like, everyone knows John Cusack, but like actually looking at John Cusack's, like, I mean, sure, things like Being John Malkovich, but that's like 10 years later. And yeah, I mean, there's a few things that I've seen him in through the years and going through that, but like there aren't that many like standout things, honestly.
But I mean, if Say Anything probably sufficed through the 90s, like to remind people that that's John Cusack, and we know who it is.
Honestly, I think that is probably one of the things that will always, like, that immortalized him. Like, honestly, scrolling through so many things, again, Serendipity is a personal favorite of mine, but it wasn't like a massive box office.
Is that like 95, 97-ish? When is that?
No, it's later, it's 2001.
Oh, okay.
It's also the same year as, and of course, High Fidelity, I think, is the other one, but that's also not until 2000.
Yeah.
So I think those are the 2 movies I want to say really people think about, even though he was in other things people have definitely seen, but often not as like a big leading.
But I think that's also a way that you remind people that you exist and that you are John Cusack if you just pop up in something else. I think that's kind of how that works.
I do think it helps that his sister actually had the better, like, career. And they have another sister, right, Anne Cusack, but she is, I think, the least known. She does pop up in a few 80s, 90s.
I remember there's like a Simpsons reference in some like 90s Simpsons thing where Homer Simpson compares his kids to the Cusacks and says like, you guys aren't exactly Joan and John Cusack. That's
Oh.
like, people just are aware of him, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Which I think also has something to do with one of the Simpsons producers being a producer of this one. So connections here. What I really thought, the interesting thing about this movie, because like for the most part, and you've said this in one of our last episodes, when we set out to basically tell all of you, is this a romantic comedy or not? And for most of the movies that we watch, it's kind of like, yeah, it's a romantic comedy, and it's kind of like a very standard romantic comedy. This one is kind of has the most well-known romantic comedy grand gesture, but I'm actually wondering if you can really qualify this as a romantic comedy.
No, I think it's a romance movie. It's a teen movie. It's a coming-of-age movie, and it's a romance movie.
Because it's funny.
It's
and
kind of like Dirty Dancing
Yeah.
that way. Like Dirty Dancing is also partially, it's a big coming-of-age story that's also set over a summer. It's also around the same time. It has these big themes of like growing up and like your first love and whatever, but it has a more dramatic edge to it. And it's also, Dirty Dancing also has the like emancipation from her dad and like kind of thing, just with a more female.
But that, I mean, the again, like kind of brings us to the question, what really defines the romantic comedy? Because in the sense of not being laugh out loud funny all the time, Pretty Woman is also not that funny. It's a really good movie, but it's not that funny. And it's really just kind of, I mean, it began, obviously, we discussed the story, like it began its life as a much darker type of movie and just kind of was marketed as a romantic comedy, and that really made it a romantic comedy. So it's a really interesting question, but yeah, I would agree. It's a romance movie for sure. And a lot of times romance gets marketed as romantic comedy because people like comedy and not everybody likes romance.
I think Pretty Woman is probably honestly also one of those that, if you really think about it, is more romance than a lot of the other ones. Definitely more romance than any Nora Ephron movie would be. I think it's just that Gary Marshall, because it has that sort of fairy tale thing to it, and because we connect Julia Roberts to more comedic performances, and there are some of that in there. But if you really think it through, it's definitely straddling the boundary between the two. And I mean, say anything clearly, it gets pretty serious just because once we get to her father embezzled all this money and there's like big existential questions involved that go beyond, oh, I will have to go to the UK for a fellowship, it gets a lot darker.
Yeah, it's not like the thing is, you just kind of like, yeah, no, that's not the movie that I like picture Catherine Hahn being the best friend and being quirky. Like, even though Lily Taylor, again, Bow Before Her is great in this.
Nobody's doing physical comedy, which honestly is something that obviously not every rom-com has to do, but you get bits and pieces of that quite often. You get slapstick humor type things in a lot of performances from people. You get more obvious, maybe in some ways, ad-libs or like that sort of Nora Ephron dialogue via Billy Crystal kind of snappy dialogue. Like, this has great dialogue, but it's
very deliberate dialogue. This is the thing. If I could put one word on this movie, it feels like Cameron Crowe was very deliberate about this movie. And it feels like a movie where he had a vision, and it might not always have been clear to other people like exactly what he was shooting for, but like weirdly the movie that this reminded me of the most is his own Almost Famous, which is clearly not a romantic comedy, but also has these themes of growing up and emancipation and all that kind of thing.
And I mean, there's Elizabethtown that also pops up in rom-com lists, so I also don't think it's purely one, because it's also much more about the father, but in this case it's the like Orlando Bloom's father that just died, and he has to journey back to Elizabethtown. And so there's certain strands. And I mean, obviously he also did Jerry Maguire. And I think Jerry Maguire also pops up on rom-com lists, but I would also equally say that is also more in the smirky romance territory.
I think Elizabethtown kind of gets grandfathered into romantic comedies because it gave us, in the critics to Elizabethtown gave us the term manic pixie dream girl.
I forgot it.
But
you said this before. I still don't fully believe it. I thought it would have been Garden State. But
it was not. That's the thing. That's why I remembered it, because I fully thought it was Garden State as well.
Yeah, And I don't know, I think it's definitely it's definitely interesting. And I think he's also much more interested in writing these kinds of coming of age stories rather than writing a full on rom-com.
Yeah.
It's just that this movie gets thrown in a lot of the best rom-com lists because a lot of people that do lists on the internet, even when they do them for big publications, don't necessarily pay attention to the nuances of genre. I'm sorry, dear entertainment journalists that should know better, but I think it's really just, but why isn't this on the list? The boombox scene. It's one of those selective memory things where
I mean,
I'm
like,
sure
why is Romeo and Juliet not on the list because it has the balcony scene? It's kind of like it's romance for sure, not the genre, not comedy.
And I mean, sure, this one has a happy ending, but I think it's also a more open happy ending than you get in a lot of things. Because it's like, yes, they're together, but clearly this is like, again, we immediately see where some issues may arise even 1 month into being to UK together. But for the moment, they're taking the sleep together, and this is where we cut off.
Yeah. And the dad is in prison the moment that they leave, right? That's not the happy ending. Like, if you really were going to go for a full happy ending, dad's out of prison kind of, and they've come back and they make up or something like that, right? But it's really her getting herself to actually like go visit her dad in prison is a big thing, and then she basically just leaves, right? And he's kind of come around, right? He's kind of like finally saying he's sorry, because like the first time when she confronts him, he's not. So he basically just says like, I did it for you, which is like yeah, sure, debatable, because like she certainly didn't need the $9,000 Wurlitzer jukebox, and he doesn't really admit wrongdoing when she actually confronts him, which I thought was a really good, like, the Cameron Crowe characters are always really complex, well thought out characters, because the more than most of these things, and again, also why I don't think it's a romantic comedy, this feels like a movie where it's about real people and things that could actually happen to real people, like in that way. And kind of the way that she expresses it at some point, that she's afraid that things are going to happen, like if a good thing happens, a bad thing will also always happen, and that just kind of feels much more like real life than a romantic comedy.
It also immediately opens with the thing with the, like, think about it, she does the valedictorian speech, and it's like, what is it? It's seen a future, go back, like, I'm afraid, you know?
Another good line.
Yeah. So we immediately sort of get that foreshadowing of like, the future may not like she's afraid of it, maybe rightly so, because from here on out all the adulting will have to happen, and then she immediately has to do a lot of adulting in the next 16 weeks. So
but see the positive, she's going to England, at least she'll have healthcare.
I guess, I mean, she's just doing a fellowship. Does fellowship come with healthcare?
I mean, like, if she goes to the UK, they have to treat.
In the NHS, I mean, in the
89, we're fine.
NHS will probably still fine,
We don't have any modern medicine yet, but everything else is, it's really, there is a lot of thought put into this. There's interesting, the other thing that she accuses Lloyd Dobler of at some point is ageism, and I'm like, I think that's the earliest that I've heard that term in a movie. Again, 89. He's really like introducing us to the concept of ageism and to basic in the same movie.
Yeah. Do we want to do like tagline criticism?
Oh, yes.
I love the tagline. The tagline is to know Lloyd Dobler is to love him. Diane Court is about to know.
Do it again.
Okay. To know Lloyd Dobler is to love him. Diane Court is about to know Lloyd Dobler.
Okay.
That is the literal tagline of this film.
You've read this to me now. I still don't get it.
What, to know him is to love him? She's about to know him.
To know, like, I think the Lloyd Dobler confused me.
Yeah.
Like, because, like, wouldn't you need to understand that Lloyd Dobler? Never mind. It's.
I mean, if
like, the movie was called Lloyd Dobler.
No, I mean, there's a movie poster. There's a man on it and a woman, and you have a man's name and a woman's name. I think you can infer.
Okay, yeah, I guess. I mean, if the movie was called, if it was Bridget Jones, I would understand it, because like that's clear. But anyway,
someone already tried. Also interestingly, because we keep singing his praises, but apparently Roger Ebert's positive review kind of really helped this movie because apparently
Oh, I know exactly why he liked this movie because
Oh,
he
yeah.
liked the
because he
one.
likes good movies.
No, he has like he like basically I think Roger Ebert is like or was like a true romantic at heart,
Mm.
and he liked like kind of complex romantic movies that might also not have been liked by a lot of other people. There's one with Josh Radnor and not Elizabeth Olsen, which is set at like I think a small New England college, and it's kind of like a quiet romance movie, which I didn't love, but Roger Ebert was completely sold in this movie, and I think it kind of bombed, and nobody else.
Yeah, exactly. This is why Cameron Crowe said it really helped that like Roger Ebert at the time when people were really still listening to this kind of review really liked it. Just looking up what he actually did say, but yeah, he obviously gave it 4 stars, so he clearly must have liked this. Yeah. Oh, that must have helped, which is interesting. And I think, yeah, otherwise it wasn't a thing. I think it must have then been more of a sleeper hit at the time than I thought it would have been. But clearly now everyone knows that scene, so something must have stuck. I don't know what the box office was like.
Yeah, also, I mean, this is still the age where box office doesn't have to all happen the first week. I mean,
Yeah,
it's good if it does, but it doesn't have to.
yeah, you can sort of still do things slower, I guess, at the time. That's still interesting. But I mean, to be fair, yeah, I mean, Cameron Crowe writes Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but then it's 7 years ago as well. And like, again, the news has come and gone almost. And
Yeah,
so there's just, yeah, there's a lot happening. And again, he hasn't directed before. So
pretty stellar job right there.
yeah,
I mean, he definitely had help from some of the best people in the industry. Again,
yeah, I
the
mean,
photography is great. Obviously, it's I mean, it's a great script because he's a good writer.
and also, like, I mean, Amy Heckerling directed Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and I mean, she does Clueless later. Like, she clearly knows what she's doing. So I mean,
I wonder how much contact they would have had with each other at that point.
yeah, I could imagine that. Because I mean, I don't know, like, is Fast Times his debut screenplay, or at least in his thing? I mean, at that point, you kind of want to probably, as a director, also work with the writer.
Yeah, not
Because I mean,
not
that wouldn't.
necessarily.
I mean,
Right?
those are like well-known things by now that I would have assumed. Yeah. What else is there to say? Oh, I didn't actually look at the overall like IMDb rating of this.
It's gonna be high, I think.
It should be higher than the average thing. Oh yeah, that's the one thing I wanted to mention. Okay, so the IMDb rating is 7.3, so yeah, that seems okay. But also, do you know what the German title of
I know the German title because like
the
my
German
Disney for
title?
some reason displayed it.
Yeah, it is Teen Lover.
Which is why I could never find this movie
Yeah,
here when people talked about Say Anything, because like I would have never thought,
Teen Lover.
who does that? I
Also
hate
interesting, by the way, because we watch it on Disney Plus. It is categorized as drama and coming of age on Disney Plus,
that.
rather
Which
than
is
drama.
fair.
Yeah,
It's fair. I mean, you when you look at the other movies that are recommended to you, those are a lot of them rom-coms,
yeah,
but it's not one.
yeah. Also, right now, I mean, I know the selection varies. Also, we're blessed with a lot more stuff on Disney Plus than the US is. But if you put in the word "say," it came up with "say nothing, say anything, and don't say a word." And I was like, mixed messages, much.
I mean,
But
and then you bring it together with When You Say Nothing at All.
mhm.
Should we do our fake taglines to close this one
Yeah.
out? Do you have one? I have one.
Yeah, you go first.
A movie that will invade your soul. Which do we say? Do we talk about that? That's one of the lines that Lily Taylor has when she talks to
You
her
invaded
idiot
my soul, her
boyfriend.
fuckboy boyfriend.
Yeah,
Yeah. I now want to say kickboxing is just on the future.
Oh, I love that. The movie that will convince you that kickboxing is the
maybe
sport of the
it's
future.
rather date someone basic instead of the fuckboy. I was maybe
It's
that's
very explanatory.
yeah. Yeah.
Dating someone basic has never felt this good.
Yeah.
From none of the people who brought you 16 candles, we bring you
Thankfully.
16 weeks.
a teen movie without date rape.
Finally, a teen
That would be at least.
although to be fair, content warning, Lily Taylor talks about like a suicide attempt in a very kind of they're not beating around the bush in that fashion. So that's something that I also thought was interesting. I'm like, would you do that now? Probably not.
I mean, not in a film. Teenagers in real life, definitely.
Yeah, but like in a film, you
but
wouldn't.
That's why it really makes sense for a character. But yeah, I think that is.
I think we've said everything.
Said everything, but say anything.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.